In the last episode, Rick, in an attempt to drive Michonne away, cruelly said extremely harsh words.
You're going back to base right now, then I'm getting you the hell out of here. If I have to knock you out, I'll put you on that goddamn boat myself. I belong here, you don't, and you will never change that. It's over. Everything we had is broken.
Rick's message was clear. Their relationship was over. Michonne was heartbroken, convinced that Rick had been seduced by the power of the Civic Republic. Determined to bring her husband back, Michonne made a wild decision during their helicopter ride back to the culling facility that night. Whether they lived or died would be up to fate.
I don't know if we'll be back.
By a stroke of luck, they landed in a sea area when they jumped, surviving the fall. It took them a full half-hour to swim to shore. They made their way to the nearest building, where only one room could be opened. The moment they stepped inside, Michonne and Rick were stunned by the overly modern furnishings. It was hard to believe such an intact room could exist in a post-apocalyptic world. It seemed they had no choice but to spend the night there. However, tension lingered from their earlier argument, and it was Michonne who broke the silence first.
We needed a timeout.
I can't believe you did that.
I can't believe you said that.
Your preferred temperature will be reached in 10 minutes.
Their argument was suddenly interrupted by a mechanical voice. Rick reached for the distress device at his waist, only to find it empty. It must have been lost when they fell into the sea. Meanwhile, Michonne stepped into the bedroom, discovering some clothes in the wardrobe that she could use to replace her soaked battle gear. Rick, after surveying the room, made his way to the study. The tools on the desk suggested that the owner was a mechanic, and the advanced smart home system was likely the owner's handiwork. Rick glanced at Michonne, who was changing, and then spotted a waste pouch on a nearby stool. To his surprise, Michonne's distress device was still there, and temptation stirred within him. Michonne, now dressed, emerged and immediately saw through Rick's intentions. She picked up the distress device, walked over, and asked directly, "Are you planning to call them here?" The chance to signal for help was within reach, but Rick hesitated, knowing that his decision would disappoint her once again. Michonne didn't expect an answer from this lost man. She turned and slipped the distress device into her pocket as she walked into the study. A storybook on the bookshelf caught Michonne's eye, and with interest, she remarked, "Judith is just like the little girl in this book, spirited and free. I love Judith so much. She would be thrilled if we brought this book back for her." Her tone shifted to sarcasm as she added, "You know, Rick, you're quite the writer too. That note you left on the escape boat, it was as moving as poetry."
Give another masterpiece for your children. Because I'm not going to be the one to tell them that I found their father, and he sent me away and chose not to come home to them.
Children.
Michonne paused, realizing she'd let something slip. She'd meant to surprise Rick when they returned home. So be it. Perhaps this son he's never met could be what awakens him.
His name is Rick. We call him RJ. I was pregnant when the bridge happened. He's almost 8.
Michonne finished speaking and looked at the man before her. However, there was no trace of the joy she had hoped for on Rick's face. Even the tears that had been on the verge of falling vanished. Instead, he coldly demanded the distress device from her.
Everything we have is broken. After saying that we were getting
You have
away,
no
I don't know what
idea
game
who
you're
we're
playing,
dealing with.
Rick.
You need to give it to me.
Raising our kids, believing you were alive, and you were.
You think I didn't want to be with you? I tried everything. We need to go back.
Your preferred temperature will be reached
Where is that
in 1
thing?
minute.
The mechanical voice interrupted their argument once more. Moments later, Rick began accusing Michonne of not listening, of showing off and drawing Pearl's attention, and even of taking the bomb and nearly getting herself killed. "I did everything I could just to keep you alive, and you dragged me off a helicopter like this," he snapped.
I don't like who you are with them. What they make you. It isn't you.
You think I want this?
Your preferred temperature has been reached.
With their conversation repeatedly interrupted by the mechanical voice, Michonne lost the desire to argue, but Rick persisted, insisting she hand over the distress device. Michonne felt a moment of utter despair. Was she supposed to stand by as her husband gave up and let the ones who started it all win?
They won a long time ago. They won the day Jadis brought me here.
It was then that Michonne realized Jadis had been blackmailing Rick with information about Alexandria. To protect his family, he had no choice but to comply. And over time, Rick's spirit was eroded, leaving him with no will to resist. But now that she was here, together they could stop Jadis. Yet Rick rejected all of Michonne's proposals. The Civic Republic was too powerful, and he couldn't risk everyone's lives for a slim chance of victory. He had to go back and maintain the balance of power with Jadis. Michonne thought that Rick was being incredibly stubborn. If he was being threatened, why not just deal with the enemy?
We go back. We find her evidence. We destroy it. We kill her. And then we go home.
Rick listened but remained silent once more. Michonne's anger flared. All her previous efforts had been in vain. This man was still determined to return to the Civic Republic. As dawn began to break, she realized their entire night of talking had been futile. Michonne decided to give up and handed the distress device to Rick. But Rick didn't activate the device immediately. Instead, he stared blankly out the window. Michonne followed his gaze and was surprised to see a crashed helicopter on the building across the street.
You saved our lives.
It's gone. So we're gone.
Yeah.
Michonne's heart leaped with hope. We can go home now. Everyone will think we died in the crash. Unexpectedly, Rick refused to go home once again. Why? Michonne couldn't comprehend it. Was the Civic Republic's allure so powerful that Rick would abandon his family? Michonne sighed and couldn't help but think of Nat, that brave and loyal friend. Even as he lay dying, he warned her to see if Rick was still the man he used to be. Now, looking back, she felt so foolish. Rick brought up Okafor, the person who had been helping him all these years.
I didn't have anything left, so I gave myself to his mission.
His mission. Do you remember the life we built? What we had?
Okafor's gone. Thorne's one of them. Now I'm the only one left.
That place is not your responsibility. You have a family.
I don't want to do this. I have to. So no.
Michonne was baffled. We used to fight to save lives. Why would he give up his ideals to be someone's puppet now? Whether Rick was repaying Okafor or seeking redemption, those lofty ideals were just an excuse. She'd had enough of such lies. Going back to her children was the only real thing left. Michonne could only vent her frustration at the table lamp. She picked up a stick to use as a makeshift weapon. Before she opened the door, she couldn't help but leave a harsh remark.
You're lying. You'll see it, and it'll be too late.
Then she opened the door and walked out. She's missed her children for too long, and she doesn't know what the situation at home is like. She slowed her pace on purpose, hoping Rick would change his mind, rush out, and embrace her, saying, "Let's go home together." Rick's mind was in turmoil. When Michonne stepped out, a sharp pain cut through him. Staying meant he could ensure the safety of those he loved and fulfill Okafor's dying wish to save more innocent survivors. Torn between family and duty, he felt as though he was being ripped apart. Michonne waited outside for a minute. The man she loved didn't come out. Her disappointment was profound. She had nothing left to hold on to, and resolutely left. Rick stood behind the door for a long time, unable to figure out what choice to make. But deep down, a voice inside him kept urging him to run after her. Michonne came down the stairs to the first-floor lobby, but she didn't expect to find a group of zombies gathered outside, and there were quite a few of them. She drew the dagger from her belt, showing not a hint of fear on her face. What she didn't know was that a Civic Republic helicopter had arrived outside the building. The soldiers were there to inspect the crash from the night before. Seeing only wreckage, they didn't bother checking for survivors. Instead, they prepared to bomb the building to rubble. This was standard procedure for the Civic Republic military. They would erase any trace that could reveal their existence, even if it meant killing survivors in the process. Just as Michonne prepared to engage the zombies, the building began to quake violently. Rick arrived in time to pull her to the ground. The first floor hadn't collapsed, but the windows shattered, letting zombies pour in. Realizing the danger, they had no choice but to run back the way they came. The bombardment continued outside, and zombies closed in from behind. They had no idea where safety lay. At this moment, Michonne and Rick didn't have the luxury of being angry. In the face of danger, nothing mattered more than each other's survival. Within minutes, zombies had reached the hallway, leaving them no choice but to keep running. As soon as they reached the safety of the room, Michonne sneered. So this is the Civic Republic you're loyal to? They don't even search for surviving soldiers. They just cruelly destroy everything. Is this really what you want to go back to? Serving them like a pawn?
It's not you, Rick.
This isn't me. How? That I would give everything, my hand, my life for you. That's not me. This is what I need to do to keep you safe.
It wasn't that Michonne didn't believe in Rick's intentions. She just thought that with the Civic Republic convinced they had died in the crash, going home together was the perfect ending. But Rick, as always, was stubborn.
So that's what I tell your son? That his father didn't want to know anything about him because he was so afraid.
I'm not the brave man. You shouldn't have come. I was taken away. I didn't have a choice. You did.
Michonne, now furious, spat. So, you're just going to ignore everything and become one of their soldiers, climbing up their ranks until one day you're out there killing innocent people like they do? You've been lying to me all along. I left my children and traveled across countless miles to find you. Did you think I wasn't terrified about what would happen to them if something happened to me?
That's why you should go.
But she took a deep breath, forcing down her emotions. She was a warrior, not someone who would break down into tears and plead. Maybe Rick had truly died 7 years ago, because the brave man she once knew would never speak to her this way. Never. Rick was momentarily stunned, but he didn't argue back. Suddenly, noises came from outside. The zombies had found their way to this room too.
We're getting out of here.
Rick deliberately acted so cold and heartless just to make Michonne leave. Michonne pushed aside her grief. Grabbing a length of rebar as her weapon, she held her head high and became the proud warrior woman again. Rick planned to use a shield to push open the door and take the zombies down one by one. After exchanging a glance, they charged out. Luckily, there weren't too many zombies, and they were still angry with each other, so they were in a competitive state when killing the zombies. They were so focused on fighting that they didn't notice the massive chandelier swaying dangerously above them or the cracks spreading across the ceiling.
Damn it, hug the wall.
The sound of heavy breathing echoed in the darkness, and both of them were filled with lingering fear. If they had been even a moment slower, they might have been trapped here forever. Using a lighter for illumination, Michonne realized that her leg was trapped under the gap. She tried to lift the chandelier, but it was too heavy for her to move on her own. Rick was about to help, but then he heard the zombies snarling again in the corridor. They must have been attracted by the noise earlier, and there were more and more of them. Michonne told Rick to leave without her, but that was obviously impossible. He reassured her, "Don't worry, if I unscrew the bolts, you'll be free." Zombies approached from behind, and Michonne used the rebar to stab one to death. But unfortunately, another zombie lunged at her. She could only do her best to hold on, but her hands were shaking from the strain as her core weakened. The zombie's decaying body slid slowly down the length of the rebar. Michonne managed to shove both corpses away, but more zombies were climbing over the gap in the stairs, closing in on them. Fate seemed to be on their side. Rick's plan worked, and Michonne was finally freed. Despite being husband and wife, Michonne still muttered a thank you.
You never have to thank me ever.
Because not everyone would stay. Once free, they sprinted down the hallway. The path ahead hadn't collapsed, and when they opened a door, they found themselves back in the familiar room where they had started. The familiar mechanical voice was still there. Now that they were safe, the atmosphere grew awkward again. After all, they had been arguing not long before. This time, Rick wasn't cold. He took Michonne's hand in his. Two lonely hearts found warmth again, and they kissed passionately. After a night of intimacy, they reconciled. When they spoke of their son, R.J., their faces lit up with happiness. But when the topic of going home came up, the atmosphere shifted again. Rick still insisted he needed to return to the Civic Republic, until he saw the scar on Michonne's back. Michonne began to recount the hardships she'd endured over the years, from the betrayal of her best friend, the relentless battles with the Whisperers, to the political schemes of the Commonwealth. Rick could picture the burdens Michonne had carried, responsibilities that should have been his. It was the first time Michonne saw Rick's severed hand, and she couldn't help but touch it. She could feel how much this man had sacrificed in his attempts to reunite with his family.
You could have hid it, Rick. You haven't. You say you can't go home, but I don't think you can go back. I'm sorry for what they did to you.
Feeling Michonne's compassion, Rick's resolve started to waver. Then, the house began to shake again, hinting that it might soon collapse. Rick stood up, calling for Michonne to get ready to leave, but she refused. She said, "If you don't make a decision now, I'm not going anywhere." This was Michonne's final effort. Rick had no choice but to sit back down and explain, his voice full of pleading. Michonne was the love of his life. Judith was their son, R.J., whom he had never met, was, and Daryl too. Even though the Civic Republic military believed them to be dead, there was still the ticking time bomb that was Jodi's. He couldn't gamble on the chance that Jodi's wouldn't act on her suspicions and kill everyone he loved. Michonne spoke slowly. "The Civic Republic attacked us a year ago. I was badly injured and nearly died. It took me a whole year to recover. I kept thinking, life is full of unexpected turns, especially in this godforsaken apocalypse. When I told you Judith and the others were fine, I was lying. It's been over 2 years, and because of the distance, we've lost radio contact. I have no idea how they're doing. All of this is because of the Civic Republic. I don't care if you want to go back to change the military or because you're worried about Jodi's threat. Rick, family is what matters most. Maybe years from now, you'll accomplish everything you set out to do. But if you return to Alexandria and everything has changed, how will you live with that?" Rick listened as if struck by a bolt of lightning. After so many years of trying to escape, he had grown to fear the Civic Republic's power like a shadow over his soul. Finding Michonne had felt like a dream. He had become hesitant and fearful, terrified of his family suffering even the slightest harm. But that fear had made him forget who he was at his core, a man who faced challenges head-on, not someone who ran from them. If his family was gone, everything he had done would be meaningless. Michonne continued, "Let's go! Let's go home. We've survived so many hardships together, and the Civic Republic won't be the one to break us. You're our leader, and you know better than anyone how to protect our home." Rick has completely awakened. His gaze turned resolute, and a leader's aura emanated from him. The brave man was back. Rick had regained his former fighting spirit. Now, the two of them gathered their belongings, ready to face and break through the obstacles ahead. Seeing this, I couldn't help but admire the actors' performances. The contrast between Rick's confusion and his renewed determination was brought out so vividly. Their teamwork was unstoppable, almost invincible. This might be what Jodi's meant when she once said, Rick would surely fail if he tried to escape alone. But together, they could overcome anything. They had just run a short distance when a rumbling sound came from the building behind them. They knew they had to keep moving if the building came down. It would be catastrophic. They spotted a car being refueled that looked like it might still run. Rick got in and, with an awkward smile, said,
Stick shift. Stick shift electric car.
Hybrid. They equipped us with enough to get home. Gotta thank her for that. Clearly they thought they could do anything.
Yep, we can. We can make this whole damn world ours if we want to.
He was back. Everything was back. This was the Rick of old, confident, strong, and humorous. But would their journey home really be smooth? Would Jodi's become suspicious?